Are you searching for the best in online black radio? Then go to blacktalkradionetwork.com, helping you filter through the noise. Real talk, black talk.
Welcome aboard Celebrity Slave Ship, departing the Gold Coast and making short stops in Bahia, Port-au-Prince, and Havana before our final destination of Savannah. Hi, I'm Miss Pat, and I'll be serving you here in Cabin A. Now, we'll be flying at an altitude that's pretty high, so shackles must be worn at all times. If you have any trouble bonding yourself, I'll be more than glad to assist. We also ask that you please refrain from call and response singing between cabins, as that sort of thing can lead to rebellion. And, of course, no drums are allowed on board. Thanks for flying, Celebrity. And here's hoping we have a pleasant takeoff.
Get on board, Celebrity Slave Ship. Get on board, Celebrity Slave Ship. Get on board, Celebrity Slave Ship. There's room for many more.
I'm sorry to disturb you, but someone is playing drums. Now, what did we just say about drums?
No drums.
It must be someone in coach. But we here in Cabin A are going to ignore those drums. In fact, we don't hear those drums at all. No, we don't. Repeat after me. I don't hear any drums.
I don't hear any drums.
And I will not rebel. Okay. I realize we're all a bit edgy after hearing about the tragedy on board the Laughing Mary. But let me assure you, Celebrity has no intention of throwing you overboard and collecting the insurance. We value you. Why, the songs you'll sing in the cotton field under the burning heat and the stinging lash will metamorphose and give birth to the likes of James Brown and the Fabulous Flames. And you are going to come up with some of the best dances, the very best dances, the Watusi, the Funky Chicken. And just think of what you are going to mean to William Faulkner. All right, so you're going to have to suffer a few 100 years. But from your pain will come a culture so complex. And with this little item here, you are going to become millionaires. Don't panic. If we're going to make it through the storm, you must abandon your God and worship a new one. On the count of 3, we will all sing. 1, 2, nobody knows the trouble us. I forgot to mention, when singing, omit the TH sound. The becomes the. They become de. Got it? Good. Nobody knows the. You don't like that one? Well, let's try another. Summertime and the living is easy. Gershwin, he's from another oppressed people, so he understands. Fish are jumping. I believe you know this one. Fish are jumping, and the cotton is. Sing, damn it! Hello? Yes, what? On your right, you will see the American Revolution, which gives the U.S. of A. exclusive rights to your life. And on your left, you will notice the Civil War, which means you'll vote Republican until FDR comes along. And we're now passing over the Great Depression, which means everyone gets to live the way you've been living. That was World War I, not to be confused with World War II, which is happening on your left, which is not to be confused with the Korean War or the Vietnam War, all of which you'll play a major role in. Oh, look! We're passing over the 60s. Martha and the Vandellas. Julia with Miss Diane Carroll. Malcolm X. Those 5 little girls in Alabama. Martin Luther King. Oh no. The Supremes just broke up. Stop playing those drums! Those drums will be confiscated once we reach Savannah, so just give them up. You can't change history. You can't turn back time. Don't listen to him. Repeat after me. I don't hear any drums. I will not rebel. I will not rebel. I will not rebel. Hi. Miss Pat here. Things got a little bit jumpy back there, but the captain has informed me that we have safely landed in Savannah. Please check the overhead before exiting, as any baggage you don't claim, we trash. It's been fun, and we hope the next time you consider travel, it's with celebrity. Have a nice day. Have a nice day. Bye-bye. Button up that overcoat. It's going to be kind of chilly. Have a nice day. Have a nice day. Have a nice day.
Context of White Supremacy. Gus T Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Friday, May 23rd, 2014. So I have been told. We are beginning the 7th installment on our study session of Mr. Ayi Kwei Armah's 2000 Seasons. We will be picking up. We are still in chapter 5. And I don't think we will complete chapter 5 today. I said weeks ago that it is a pretty chunky chapter, easily the largest chapter in the book. I think we will finish it up next week, but we are still in chapter 5. Many dramatic things happen in this chapter. Just stay tuned. You will see how things unfold. The audio that we began the program with this week, that is the play The Colored Museum by Mr. George C. Wolfe. He is a black male. He has since transitioned, but he has done many, many plays, all dealing with racism. I think Fences might be one of his most popular works that also deals with racism. I think James Earl Jones played the lead role in one of the productions of Fences. At any rate, I started with that because our segment this week, as well as how we concluded last week, on a slave ship with the small number of black people who were trying to escape, who were less confused. They were tricked. Alcohol played a major role, and white friends. They were tricked, captured. They've been on the boat and lamenting their horrific fate of being enslaved for the white destroyers. And I just thought it was an interesting contrast with, I think, frequently, it even reminds me of Django, frequently when we talk about slavery, it does not have the same gravity that I think when white people talk about 9/11 or the Holocaust. Typically, they don't have a lot of jokes and ha-ha, he-he. It reminded me of Django Unchained, really, where frequently I think the trauma and the horrors of the terrorism that black people have experienced worldwide are omitted, ignored, and diluted with a lot of inappropriate humor. I just don't think it's funny when you're talking about raping, stealing, killing, and enslaving people. I just don't find any humor in that at all. But the other thing, I think in that piece specifically, I think the humor is being used purposely to make people uncomfortable. But in that piece particularly, the drums, you hear Miss Pat, who is the narrator, if you will, and she's talking about the drums. We got to control the music that you're using. We don't want music to become a part of your weapon to rebel and revolt. That's going to be a key theme this week. And I think that's even come up on the program before with regards to music being used as a weapon towards black liberation and why white people expend so much time and energy to make sure that we get all of the non-constructive sounds that you currently hear, whether it's MTV or BET or your local radio station. They know the importance and significance of music. We will go ahead and get started. Again, we are in chapter 3. We left off on PDF page 209. PDF page 209. We are at the very top of the page. If you're looking at the PDF, that would be the actual book, page 193, but we are still in chapter 5. We'll go ahead and get started. Context of White Supremacy, Mr. Ayi Kwei Armah, 2,000 Seasons. In his anger, they were flecked with blood. John did not drown. A rope was lowered for him, and he was hauled up, shaking from the water, his teeth chattering like an infant's, though the day was warm. He had lost his knife in the water, but when he reached the ship again, he rushed at the watcher, who had hurled him down as if he still had a knife to kill him with. The watcher was of slight build, yet in that body he had strength enough to amaze us all, and skill for the using of that strength. Twisting himself to one side, he, in the same movement, took John by one flying knee and forced him crashing head foremost against the wood. 3 Askaris, who had been watching like charmed snakes, now forced the watcher down, while another took John below. When the watcher was completely subdued, the Askaris brought 2 knives, and themselves completed the removal of the new captive's clothing. Mokili, best among us in the art of healing, looked at the watcher and shook his head. "That man is already destroyed," he said. All the new ones were led into the belly of the ship. In the ship's immobility and ours on it, the sun burned us with a hostile intensity that made some ask again why we were kept up here, away from the shade below. Ah, ignorant, imagination. In the evening, the ship moved again, a slow movement, but it raised a breeze to fight the sun's persisting fierceness, so that for the day's remainder our bodies knew the comfort between heat and cold. From where we sat, the land became visible, land with no forests, no trees to be seen on it, nothing except immense expanses of sand and water. In places, the water seemed to have broken through the sand, but the water gaps were small, and the water coming into the sea came with little force, hardly ever coloring the sea the way the Susin does. Night came. Our bodies had lain unsheltered in the heat of the day. Now they grew rigid with the night's cold and its wind. Another morning made us grateful for the coming heat. At strange intervals, we were given food and drink. Corn cooked in salt, water as if we had entered the 7th season of some malevolent drought. The sand near the horizon gave way to something green, but this was bizarre vegetation, 1,000 dry-looking stalks pushing out of the water. Coming closer, we saw space between the stalks, but enough only for such as snakes and lizards. The ship came to a river mouth, entered, then turned right into a long lagoon. There was wind here, wind surprising in its strength, blowing as if it had been forced from large open expanses into too small a space. Yet this wind was also fetid. It carried the smell of unnameable diseases. Once from the land lining the lagoon, small arrows fell in profusion against the front part of the ship. The white destroyers and their askaris seem to have expected this. Most took shelter below, while those remaining sought covered positions from where they shot bullets into the surrounding vegetation. But we saw no one emerge or fall. A day's journey up the lagoon, the ship reached a huge place cut raw into the forest land. This was no stone place. It was built of wood and mud, but its shape was close to that of the stone place at Poano, and along its walls walked askaris, always carrying arms. The greatest number of captives was added here. After this loading, the ship went slowly out again onto the open sea. We too were driven down below. The ropes binding us were removed, but immediately we were each locked lying down into some sort of trap. We sank into a leaden silence and lived in it for days we had not learned to count. Our spirits numbed with the immensity of separation from each other, separation from our land, separation from our people, and our way. Among the men, Lanai emerged earliest. Talking gently, alone at first, and unheeded, he asked if there were among us any who understood more than their own particular language. That question brought the first sound of laughter on the ship, for one of the others who knew our language asked Lanai what kind of fool could be found alive who spoke only one language. Other mouths unsealed themselves. 7 languages we found were sufficient to reach every spirit there with us, and for these 7 languages we had over 30 who could turn one into the other, experts in the arts of speech. So in that endless time below, each group told the others of itself through its chosen spokesman. Each group heard and understood every other's remembrance through its own interpretation, and separation lost a slight measure of its disastrous hold. Listening minds began to grow connections. The remembrances were separate, but underneath them all ran connected meaning. Our common captivity now, our broken connectedness before the onslaught of predators and destroyers, and for the times to come, our common destiny. Heavy lay the sense of separation upon our mind. Children came down at night and told us we were still within sight of land, but every passing day the thought ran impotently through our mind. Sailing into unknown seas, captives of destroyers. It would have been better if we had died. Some talking as if in sleep, resolved to kill themselves if they found a way. Most were silent. A man with a soft voice, he the watcher who had almost killed the slave driver John, said once it would be foolish for anyone to kill himself just like that. If we were truly resolved to die, he said, we should find ways to use our death to help those left behind. That would be the only intelligent dying. All who spoke after that agreed, but then one said it was difficult to know how to accomplish such things. The soft-voiced one said, without contempt, we could not complain now we did not have enough time for thinking of ways. A child came with heavy news for us. We had passed a river mouth turbulent with brown water, then towns, which he described, and that same day the hulk of a huge white ship had been left behind on our right. We thanked the child and fell silent. Why so quiet? The soft-voiced one asked. That is our home we have left behind, Kamara answered him. But soon the ship stopped again. We could see nothing except that new captives were brought in. Where we had thought there was no more space, a fantastic force is the greed of whites. The destroyers found room for 30 more. This loading took more time than any other. We asked the newcomers their news. They said they had tried escape right there on the ship. 10 of them had died at the destroyer's hands. 3 had leaped afterwards into the sea and held themselves under till they died. Now they had been defeated, and the white destroyers were waiting for a wind. It came fitfully when it came at all, the wind. Where we were trapped, the strongest wind could only reach us as the languid motion of our own used air. But even that was a merciful thing compared to the total stillness of these days. The children coming down at night said the ship made only brief spastic motions forward every day, then stopped. The air was heavy with its motionless humidity. Among us the sound of coughing, at first staggered and subdued, grew to be a strong, constant noise. Even the white destroyers, in their greed, grew alarmed for our health. They changed the method of our feeding. Now, except for the irons on our legs, we were freed in little groups, 7, 10 at a time, and driven upward by an armed askari to take our corn. Water also we drank up there after being made to jump and run for air and for the loosening of stiffened bodies. Ask the destroyed. They alone can tell you, they who have been taken into whiteness, if they still have voices to tell you what they have seen. They will let you know of time ignorant of dusks, of time without dawns, time with no connecting motion from midday to dusk to night and dawn again. Ask the destroyed. Ask us, we who woke after sleep, never knowing if nights had passed or days. We who woke suspended on immobile water, breathing motionless air. We who woke immersed in the dirt of successive days and nights. Cleanness became a mere remembrance visiting our minds. The vision of an open courtyard swept in the early morning, the broom's passage traced out in transient, repeated beauty on fresh sand, the easy feel of morning earth under rested feet. Every remembrance of goodness brought frustration to the mind bound for slavery. Which remembrance of that dead time shall we pick for your hearing? Dirt, then, was our entire surrounding. The air itself had turned to liquid filth. Each body lay immobile in its own refuse. There were zombies sent down to clean our place, but they came not for work. They came to find entertainment, whipping tied-down men. One of the zombies struck the soft-voiced one. He cursed them all, softly, but it was a bitter curse, and the zombie understood its sting. The whip danced wildly in the center of our space. Other voices cried pain, but the zombie found the soft-voiced one again, and this time did not lose him. By the time the zombie sought the air above us, the soft voice had grown silent. It spoke again, much later, and in a scream hoarse with ultimate fear. What had frightened the courageous soft-voiced one himself. He had felt his right side, thinking to find blood from the wound left there. It was not blood he found, but a thing that felt like a soft worm. After the first scream, he understood it was not alone. How had he lived with worms eating him so near the surface of his skin? What new disease had added itself to his pains and ours? Now the soft-voiced one chuckled. I will not reach their destination. I am destroyed already. Lanai answered him. Tawia was right. Better to have died on our own land. A voice unrecognized. What will they do to us if we die so? Another. They will throw us into the sea. Again the first voice. Ancestors, this death is so new. We cannot join you. We cannot even be wandering ghosts. The answering voice. No. This is a complete destruction. Death with no returning. Lanai again. Tawia was right. Then Kwesi. Tawia was right. They threw one man out next morning. He died in the night. All that night, terrifying screams broke from his throat. In his fear, he begged the ancestors not to forsake his soul, but his prayers brought him no solace. In the morning they came to take him to throw him in the sea. One askari held a torch. Two took the corpse. Behind them walked two white destroyers, their faces covered in fear against the diseases we lived in. On their way out, they heard the soft-voiced one cough, an unnerving cough. The smaller of the white destroyers, he who must have been a sort of healer among them, asked for the torch, and in its light examined the soft-voiced one as if he were some sick dog. Then the healer nodded to the taller destroyer. The taller destroyer nodded to an askari and shouted an order through the covering on his face. One of us near the entrance heard the order and understood it. They mean to cast you into the sea, he shouted to the soft-voiced one, even before you die. Oh, ancestors. The soft-voiced one said, they shall not. There was fear among us, an uncertain fear unfixed in its cause. Now the discovery of the killing disease sharpened this fear, gave it intensity, gave it shape in our minds. The removal of lifeless bodies grew so frequent it tired the zombies working for the white destroyers and moved them to futile cursing. There was no telling which body would go next, for the disease could come sudden as a lightning stroke. Distance from those already dead gave no assurance of safety. The still air we all breathed was itself connection deadly enough between every still living person and those already wrecked by death. The time has come for us to pause for breath. It is not that our remembrance fatigues us. No, this is no halt brought on by the tiredness of flesh or any weakening of our mind. In our remembrance, this is no stagnant stop, but a necessary part of our memory's flow in the telling of the way. For this time that has come, it is a time to be filled not with hollow sounds, loud with emptiness. We have reached the time when we must speak of consciousness, of unconnected consciousness. Is there more to say beyond the clear recognition this is destruction's keenest tool against the soul? That the left hand should be kept ignorant of what its right twin is made to do? Who does not see in that cleavage the prime success of the white destroyer's road of death? That the heart detached should beat no faster, even when limbs familiar to it are moved to heinous acts? Is that not already the severed atrophy of connected faculties, the white method of destruction? That our left eye should be set to see against its twin, not with it. Surely that is part of the white destroyer's 2,000 seasons of triumph against us. That the sight of the eye should be unconnected, cut off from the mind's embracing consciousness. That the ear's hearing should be blocked off from the larger knowledge of the mind. That the nose's smelling and the tongue's tasting should be pushed apart from the mind's whole consciousness. What is that but death's whiteness in delirious triumph? That the hand should touch, and the knowledge of the substance touched should stay trapped in the touching hand alone. That feeling fingertips should each in itself alone contain the shut-off knowledge of members estranged from each other. Could that be different from the blighting success of the white destroyer's road? That the passion and the thinking and the action of any one of us should be cut off from our connected consciousness by mere physical things, walls of wood or walls of stone. That would indeed be the manic celebration of death's white empire. For then, in these surroundings dominated by the walls of whiteness built to separate sense from sense, to cut faculty from faculty, pull member from member, and drive person against person, the passion and the thinking and the action of any one of us would stay impotently trapped in that particular consciousness alone, doomed to perish, a stream of useless visions, useless sounds, useless thoughts, whose passage brings us no closer to our way, the way. In these surroundings built to separate each of us from the other, to turn each discrete one selfish from the whole, the seeing and the hearing and the thinking of each of us would find no understanding with any other, not even access to the general consciousness, and all our uttering would be like the wild, senseless cacophony of the marketplaces brought against us by the white destroyers. And then, in that thorough death, the single freedom of C.O.W.S. to roam the ship, imprisoning us nighttime and daytime, would have been nothing but the useless, fortuitous license of the individual lopped off from our common destiny. Then, in that saturating destruction, C.O.W.S. individual motion would have been cut off, unconnected with the larger purpose of the whole, immobilized. His mind would have been nothing but the shrunken individual mind with only enough capacity to think of the hustling salvation of the single zombie body, ignorant and caring nothing of the only worthwhile liberation, the rediscovery of our way. And we, the chained ones, our bodies and our minds, held down under the white destroyers' walls of wood and iron, we would have had no knowledge of the silent, patient, liberating plan of the reasons why the proud C.O.W.S. himself, bent in a wisdom dictated by connectedness, bent his pride to show the staring white destroyers that constant reassuring smile of humility, bent to follow death's white messengers like an over-faithful dog, till in overflowing confidence the white destroyers left him free to roam where he pleased on this ship imprisoning us, left him free to do what he might please, because it was obvious to them his pleasure could never go against their destructive intent. How, in the absence of connectedness, would any knowledge have reached us of C.O.W.S.' final wanderings that night on the ship imprisoning us, of his flattering the mirthful white watchers till a happy oblivion made both of them watchers no longer, so that, still smiling, C.O.W.S. received from their very hands the wildly burning torches for his descent to the root of our liberation? How, in the absence of connectedness, would our consciousness have come by any vision of his quiet dance into the darkness where he connected barrel to barrel, connected barrels to the outer wall of our floating prison, connected fire to dormant power, and danced silently back past the happy watchers, still dreaming reassuring dreams, left them their used torches, and came silently back among us, where no fragmented, unconnected self would have known to come. That night C.O.W.S. came silently, but among us those still awake in our restlessness heard his breathing heavy in spite of his silence, and then we heard the thunder he had prepared for the night. In the absence of connectedness, our minds too would have found no meaning in that liberating thunder, and like the white destroyers, we would have heard in its fantastic loudness only an empty disturbance dependent on senseless chance. But connected ears heard that thunder, and our mind understood it. Ah, happy misfortune, fortunate disaster, to return. The stillness around us in that ship took on the heaviness of doom. There had been some hopes this turgid airlessness would not last, but whole days passing with not the softest sound of any breeze erased that hope and left the white destroyer's ship stunned out there on the open sea, the destroyers themselves walking dazed with us, their stolen victims, below them. Now among us the fearful killing disease, the unmentionable itself, ran freely. It drove the destroyers past madness, for each passing day brought a multiplicity of deaths, human loss to us, loss of gain to the white destroyers. The one by the entrance had been right. The time came when the soft-voiced one was to be taken out for throwing into the sea, and he was not yet dead. It was the slave driver John himself who came, his face covered against our diseases like a white destroyer's, to carry the light body. The slave driver carried the soft-voiced one like a beast hunted down and killed. The legs of the soft-voiced one, lit by an Ascari's torch, hung behind the slave driver. His head drooped over the slave driver's chest, to all appearances dead weight, nothing more. But halfway to the open entrance, all things changed. The soft-voiced one, who had looked so like a lifeless corpse, became in a moment a determined, furious being, potent as some irresistible natural force. In a movement too swift for the following eye, he braced his legs around the slave driver's trunk. The slave driver, surprised, tried to pry loose the legs. The soft-voiced one's wasted body, however, had acquired an extraordinary strength. It was flesh no longer, but something immeasurably hard, say rock, say iron, obedient only to the soft-voiced one's will. The slave driver brought down his hands in a second attempt to shake the entwining legs from their constricting grip upon his body. That same moment, the soft-voiced one raised his hands, his left hand, no longer flopping like a dead thing, took the back of the slave driver's head, while the free right hand groped for and soon found his chin. Holding the slave driver's head in this way, the soft-voiced one ripped off the cloth covering the face with his teeth. Then simultaneously he pressed in the sides of the slave driver's mouth, a thumb sunk into the right cheek, fingers digging into the left, so that the slave driver's mouth fell open against his will, as if he were a child surprised. Now the soft-voiced one held open the slave driver's mouth, and in one movement of amazing speed swung his own exhausted, emaciated, tortured body upward, so that the two heads were on a level, his mouth next to the slave driver's. The slave driver gave a shuddering jerk, but the grip of the soft-voiced one was strong. The soft-voiced one brought his mouth exactly together with the slave driver's, and then, incredible obedience to will, we saw him with our own eyes bring up all the bile and dead blood from within his body into his mouth, and this mixture he vomited forcefully into the slave driver's now captive mouth. The slave driver grew mad with a desperate rage. He tried to tear the sick man's head away from his. In vain. His chest heaved, refusing at first to swallow the deadly vomit from the sick man's mouth. In vain. The sick man's mouth was stuck to the slave driver's like a nostril to its twin. It was not to be separated by any force outside the sick man himself. The deadly vomit was twice rejected by the struggling slave driver. 3 times the dying man refused to let it escape harmlessly on to the ship's wood below. 3 times the dying man held the virulent juices, rejected in his own mouth and throat. 3 times, with increasing force, he pushed them down the slave driver's reluctant throat. The 3rd time the slave driver's resistance was broken, and the sick man shared death with him, allowing not one drop to escape. Choking, the slave driver swallowed death with the breath of remaining life. Then he fell to the floor with the soft-voiced one still inseparable from him. It was now that 2 destroyers, the healer and the tall one, wondering no doubt at the meaning of the long silence and impatient because the slave driver had not returned above to throw their victim, the soft-voiced one, into the sea, came down to see what was going on. They stumbled into the 2 on the floor. It took time for their eyes to see all that was to be seen, longer for their minds to comprehend what they had seen. Then it was fear we saw in their movements. The tall one shot the soft-voiced one dead. Then the destroyers summoned another of their own kind, a huge one, from above to carry out the corpse. That one came clad in white from head to foot, as if he had come to carry not a particular dead man, but death itself. And he had left with the body faster than he had come in. The other 2, they stood just a little longer, staring at the slave driver John's fallen body. They did not help him. They left him there, and after they had gone up, the huge destroyer returned with another almost as large and taller. Together they took the slave driver and pushed him into the space the soft-voiced one had left, and shackled his body and his neck into traps like the rest of us. The slave driver John, he died that night, not from disease, though the soft-voiced one had given death to him as surely as a white man lives to destroy. It was this that killed him. The shock of waking to find himself finally trapped with us, his condemned half-brothers, not among his friends, the whites. That night he called out to them 30 times like a frightened boy calling to his mother. We heard him in a violent struggle against himself, ending in an uncontrolled shaking that snapped his neck under its trap. In the morning, the destroyers came again briefly and looked at him. In the light of their torches, we saw him too. His body was already covered with huge red welts, as if in some sudden bubbling out of yaws. The two huge destroyers took the body out and came back. A sharp dispute now broke out among the whites. Those who had taken out the body refused to continue doing the slave drivers' other work. The dispute remained unresolved. The destroyers hurried out. They will be wanting one of us to take over the slave drivers' work, one of us said. There was an answer. Not me. I will not be the destroyer's tool. Another, not me. Another. I will do it, said a voice, C.O.W.S. voice. It has to be done, unless we all wish to die here like this. It is death anyway, said a voice, but a different one asked C.O.W.S. a direct question. How will they agree to choose you? Make a noise. The answer sounded ridiculous. What kind of noise? Any kind, as loud and as long as you can make it. Stop only when I say so. So when the destroyers came again and walked uncomprehending into a wall of noise, they answered with anger, but even whips were futile against determined, connected will knowing its purpose, and it was C.O.W.S. voice alone that had the power to stop the noise. The destroyers left, but the counsel they went up to take was nothing drawn out. Such was the root of C.O.W.S. freedom in our imprisonment, the small root that grew with purposeful care into a larger root. How inadequate the seeing that remains broken off, unconnected to any larger perception. How lacking in sufficiency the hearing unconnected to a greater knowledge. How stupid the utterance cut off from the higher understanding of the connected whole. Monstrous the barrenness of people when outside the lonely, cut off self there is no connection with the whole. Blood itself is impotent before the white perdition brought against us by the destroyers from the sea. The severing of each mind, the cutting of each soul off from the whole being of our people, the removal of each single present away from knowledge of our common past, our common destiny, against all this blood itself is impotent if it flows away from connectedness, away from our single way, the way. Ludicrous is the freedom of the slave unchained in his single body if his mind remains a cut-off individual mind, not a living piece of our common mind, our common soul. For in the absence of that necessary connectedness of the soul that will live, what is any slave body's freedom but the destroyer's license contemptuously given to the slave to dance the jiving dance of his own death agony. Against the death brought by whiteness, only the greatest connecting force will prevail. The working together of minds, connected souls, connected, traveling along that one way, our way, the way, connected thought, connected action, that is the beginning of our journey back to ourself, to living again, the connected life, traveling again along our way, the way. Sobo was free of the chains holding us, of the traps we were still in. What meaning could his single freedom have had it been the individual freedom of the unconnected soul? What could we, trapped below, have known of his thoughts, of his intentions, and of his actions had he been merely an individual captive, singly freed? How then could we have escaped the stupidity of the unconnected viewpoint, each forever petrified in his separate situation, each hardened in her cut-off condition? Context of White Supremacy. The number to dial, 760-569-76. The code, 564943 pound. Press star 6 if you would like to participate. That number again, 760-569-7676. The code, 564943 pound. Press star 6 if you would like to participate. If you do not want to use your phone to dial in, you can press the button on the Black Talk Radio Network page. If you are listening there, it should be pretty obvious in the center of the page where it says call the program. You can just click that. If you are not listening via Black Talk Radio Network, you can put in the following URL, which is tiny, and that's TINY, tiny.cc/one race, and that's the number 1. The URL again is tiny.cc/one race, and that is the number 1. Once you put that URL in, you get the page opened, you'll see a link on the left side of the page for the Flash player. Click that link. It'll open a tiny window on your screen. On the top line, there will be a drop-down menu. All you have to do is click it and look for the number that I just gave out, which again is 760-569-7676. On the second line, it will ask for the code, which again is 564943. On the final line, it'll ask for a name. You can click random keys, use a nickname if you want to use if you're comfortable with your real name, that's fine too. Once you're done, click the green button at the bottom, and it should connect you to the live broadcast. You should be able to hear us. If your internet is fast, then it will sound crystal clear. If you have sluggish internet, then it won't sound so good. But you can use that. It is free anywhere in the world. With that, we will go ahead and get started. If folks have commentary they would like to share, again, we are still in Chapter 5. I will go ahead and hit the phone lines. I hope folks took some notes or have some thoughts, observations on what they've heard during this week's segment. Let's see, Mr. Demery 4. Line should be open. I will look for other hands as I see folks who have things they would like to share.
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. First I'll get to the slave driver who met his demise. Not that I have much sympathy for him, but I thought it was interesting that I tried to do some research on Jewish individuals that were aiding the Nazis during that Holocaust, and it's very hard to find anything written about Jewish collaborators other than the Sonder Commandos that Mr. Nelly Fuller told us about in one of the programs. But it just seems to me that these writing styles and the way our minds work, we are quick to jump on the collaborators with the white oppressors, and then we take our mind off of the focus where it should be on the white people who are committing or that are most responsible for these acts in the first place. And I'll start off with that, but I wanted to also say something about the fact that the word greed was mentioned quite a few times in this segment of the book, and it struck me that greed is diametrically opposed, or it is diametrical to reciprocity, which is the way. So I thought that he was using the word greed, to give us an idea of just the opposite of the way that things should be in a system of justice. But it was, since it's not a system of justice, then greed is prevalent in the minds of the white destroyers and also in present day in our system today. When the book says, of unconnected consciousness, is there more to say beyond the clear recognition that is destruction's keenest tool against the soul? So unconnected consciousness is like destruction's tool against the soul. I thought that was profound. It was mentioning that when the people that was on the ship were taken by fear, and the killing disease had already set in. What they realized through understanding that it was 7 different languages and that they could finally communicate, then that they should use the fact that now they could communicate towards coming up with some type of plan, fear would grip you and paralyze you from acting. But if you can get past the fear, then you can start to conquer any situation that might be before you. So without taking up too much time, the author uses 3 times a lot. It was 3 times that the dying man refused to allow C.O.W.S to put to vomit in his mouth, to put the disease into him. But I did some research on it. It's a symbol. The symbol 3 symbolizes mystery, and it has a spiritual connotation. It symbolizes the body, soul, and the spirit, along with 3 types in the universe: matter, astral, and spirit, and as well as 3 levels of comprehension. You got literary, allegorical, and esoteric. And also the book mentioned greed, and greed is diametrically opposed to reciprocity, which is the way. And he spoke a lot of the greed of the white destroyers. And he said that greater than any quality that they had, that greed was greater than any quality that the white destroyers had. I'll mute my line and give someone else a chance.
Appreciate the commentary. Any of the other folks on the line had anything they wanted to share?
Good evening. May I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I'm just starting to notice the pattern in the book where people, where they really use titles. They don't use titles. They use actions for people, like the watcher, or the utterer, or the hearer, and it's like what I do defines who I am. Whereas in European culture, who I am, defines what I do, or what I cannot do, or what I am able to do. So in this writing, in this book, the things that you do, that's what your actions dictate who you are. Whether you're a watcher or utterer or anything else, you are defined by your actions. But in European culture, if you're a king, you are defined by your title. Or you are a pastor, you are defined by that title. Everything is your title. Okay, you're a black person. You're defined by that title. That's going to determine what you do, and that will decide who you are as a person. So I'm just now starting to notice that pattern in the book. And because of, I like the part where it says, when we're talking about the languages, and he said, what kind of food that could be found alive who spoke only one language? It's just, and the English typically, at least I know they strive for dominance by getting everyone to speak their language. But maybe they have some limitations when it comes to speaking other people's language. Maybe they don't pick it up as well. I don't know. But I do know that we don't speak more languages here in this country, and it's a real liability. And second, the third thing is I really, really agree when he was talking about killing yourself. He said, once it would be foolish for anyone to kill himself just like that. You know, if they were truly resolved to die, he said, you should find ways to use their death to help the people left behind. And I have always made it my practice when I'm dealing with a truly heinous person. If I've got to, if I'm going to get fired or blown away or sent away or something like this, I always let them know. When I go, you will be going with me. You will not be staying here to continue all this madness. There is nothing that's going to keep me from taking you with me. So I just really believe in that. I believe that if you're going to be, bombed out of existence, you should take as many people who cause all of those niggling problems with you as possible. Oh, that was a word, that word. I shouldn't have used that. Okay. The next thing was I was impressed by how quickly they said that just being tied up downstairs in their prisons, in their cages, that they just kind of fell apart physically, because they always say your body rusts out faster than it wears out. So it's just it takes decades, for you to fall apart just by old age. But if you're just locked up for a few weeks, you just completely fall apart and left from not being used. And I think, and then possibly the action that the sick guy who probably had tropical worms, and I think those would probably be tropical roundworms, and probably something pulmonic too. I think the way he reacted to John, when John was dealing with that adolescent female, I'm thinking that there's probably a history there. Maybe the destroyers probably had acted inappropriately with his daughter or his sister or some adolescent young person, female close to him, because of his reaction. That was a very personal reaction, probably something in the author's life also. So anyway, those are my observations.
Appreciate the input. Participation is a little lagful today as we are scooting down. Should only be maybe 2 of these remaining, and we will be all done with the book. It's reminding me of Warmth of Other Suns, a book that was nowhere near the size in terms of this book being much, much smaller than Isabel Wilkerson's Warmth of Other Suns, but challenging for different reasons. The length and trying to keep all the different narratives together of different characters that she presents in the book, but kind of the same thing where the participation greatly waned as we continued. And those were both books that people voted for. That is one where people pick these books that are challenging and then don't participate. Man. Really quick, one thing, Sobo was not the person who jumped on John, the slave driver, to put the bile and death in his mouth. Just wanted to point that out because Sobo is going to pop back up in the book as a very important character as we continue this week. But just to make sure folks don't get crisscrossed with names and characters. With regards to the challenge that this book presents, I was going along. I had kind of noted this before. I know one of the things that they mark as being an indicator of a book being a bit more difficult to read, just in terms of your brain computer being able to process the information, is the length of sentences. When I was following along with the audio today, I looked and there was a paragraph. It was about 12 lines on the actual page. So it started at the bottom of the page and it went on to the next page. It's about 12 total lines in the paragraph. It was all one sentence. And I was like, wow, that's something that I know from writing classes and what have you, that generally, if you're going to have a sentence that's that long, it's probably going to be very complicated with a lot of different phrases or semicolons and just different sections of the sentence that makes it a lot more challenging for your brain to process all of that. And even I've had some English instructors who will encourage you to break a sentence up that gets that long, particularly if it's one paragraph is one sentence. That, in my opinion, I think can help explain why a lot of people have found this book a bit more challenging to read, among many other factors. But at any rate, see some of the other things that stood out. The section that Karma touched on about them saying, you shouldn't just commit suicide because we are in a terrible position. It almost reminded me a tad of Mr. Fuller's concept of MECA, or MECJ. I think it was MECJ, now it's MECA, Maximum Emergency Compensatory Act, where if you get to the point, as they were in, where it is unbearable and you just can't take it anymore, then you eliminate as many racist suspects as possible and yourself in the process. It reminded me of that greatly in that segment, and I've thought of that as well for non-white people who get to that point where they just feel like it's the racist stuff, but just putting more pressure on them than they can possibly bear. Because we are in a war. I think that same situation when you're in a war, if you are a soldier, if you are a combatant, you don't just try to kill yourself if you're going to throw a grenade or what have you. You try to get around as many enemy combatants as possible. So you are inflicting some damage. And his comment just in the book, so that your death can be of some value to the black people that are still among the living. I thought that was important as well. Let's see. Look to see if some of the other things that stood out. The concept of unconnectedness. I feel like that's come up a lot. In fact, that's in YURUGU. When I was doing the reading, I remembered that passage. If people who read Dr. Marimba Ani's YURUGU, that was the first book that we did for a study session, also very challenging. She begins many of the chapters, almost all, not quite all, but she begins many of the chapters with sections from Armah's writings. And I think Armah even writes a section at the beginning of the book in the preface where he just kind of writes something about the importance and what they're going to be, what the purpose of YURUGU is, the book. But she starts off a lot of the chapters with segments from either this book or some of his other novels. And I remember the passage that we covered this week about the unconnectedness and how that is a triumph when white people are able to have things in fragments. That's one of his other books, Ayi Kwei Armah, Fragments. I'll just read a passage and see if anything stood out to the folks that are on the line, where he says, if you have the PDF, it's the actual page number is 202. I'm kind of at the bottom, where he says, and we, the chained ones, our bodies and minds, held down under the white destroyer's walls of wood and iron, we had no knowledge of the silent, patient, liberating plan of the reasons why the proud Sobo himself, bent in a wisdom dictated by connectedness, bent his pride to show the staring white destroyers the constant, reassuring smile of humility, bent to follow death's white messengers like an over-faithful dog till in overflowing confidence the white destroyers left him free to roam where he pleased. That's not quite the connectedness passage I thought it was. I saw it there, and that's not the one I wanted, but he's hinting to it there. I'm going to get the one that I actually wanted, but I thought that was important too, because that reminded me what I said, that white people think of us as pets. I brought this up a couple weeks ago, and I think it's come up repeatedly over the time then, but he said it right there. He said it a couple times in terms of the white destroyers treating them as animals and dogs and pets, not human beings, and I think that's ubiquitous within the system of racism, white supremacy. Okay, it was right there. I just had to look up the page a little bit. Okay, so this is the connectedness. He says, of unconnected consciousness, is there more to say beyond the clear recognition this is destruction's keenest tool against the soul, that the left hand should be kept ignorant of what its right twin is made to do? What does not see in that cleavage who does not see in that cleavage the prime success of the white destroyer's road of death? That the heart detached should beat no faster, even when limbs familiar to it are moved to heinous acts. Is that not already the severed atrophy of connected faculties, the white method of destruction? That our left eye should be set to see against its twin, not with it. Surely that is part of the white destroyer's 2,000 seasons of triumph against us, that the sight of the eye should be unconnected, cut off from the mind's embracing consciousness, that the ear's hearing should be blocked off from the larger knowledge of the mind, that the nose's smelling and the tongue's tasting should be pushed apart from the mind's whole consciousness. What is that but death's whiteness in delirious triumph? That the hand should touch and the knowledge of the substance touched should stay trapped in the touching hand alone, that feeling fingertips should each in itself alone contain the shut-off knowledge of members estranged from each other. Could that be different from the blighting success of the white destroyer's road? He goes on, but it's continuing with this same thought of disconnectedness and separation. Did anything stand out in that segment? And if anybody remembers from YURUGU, did anybody remember that passage from YURUGU, Dr. Marimba Ani?
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
I think the beginning of that passage was used in one of the chapters that Dr. Marimba Ani wrote in her book, YURUGU. And I think it alludes to the fact that white people are good at causing a fragmentation, whereas, in other words, something can be plain to someone who is less confused, and then someone who is confused cannot see it, although it's right in the face. That the part about the sight of the eye should be unconnected, and your ear and all of your senses have been cut off. So you can't disseminate the information correctly like it should be disseminated, because you've been fragmented. You've been cut off. But someone who is less confused it's plain as day to them. And so that is, you might say, part of the ingenious of the system, or just that we're not paying attention, or, we should study more so that we can understand these patterns as they come up, so that we won't be hoodwinked.
Yes. This is so exciting to me. I'm going to have to work it, not speaking too fast and not getting too excited. This is so exciting. And it's when I first heard that, read that white guy saying, "Are you going to believe me or your own lying eyes?" I said, that's how it works. You take what the eyes are seeing and you somehow disconnect that from how that person's mind processes their visual input, and you're just changing them into non-processing inputs. They're just, they're useless. But but white people are disconnected. They're fundamentally disconnected. The melanins, they're processors. They really are processors, and their processors, the melanins, they're not the same type of semiconductors. And you have those semiconductors in your inner ear. You have those semiconductors in your eyes. You have those semiconductors in your skin. You have those semiconductors deep in your brain. They're semiconductors. They're processors. And white people, the melanins, just don't process that well. They just don't process those signals. And so they don't receive those signals. That's why they're not connected. They don't know anything's there. But, okay, I'm a little off topic, but I noticed this weekend. I was watching the homeless people, and I was comparing the homeless black people and the homeless white people. And the homeless black people never have dogs, and the homeless white people always have dogs. Now, why, when you are so constrained in resources, would you have these animals if it wasn't absolutely essential? They need those animals because they need something that can receive signals. They really do. They need those animals because the fact that they're out in the open, they need to be able to connect with the environment so that they remain safe. And the black homeless people don't need that. They don't need that. They don't need to expend their very last resources on animals. It was just an amazing observation. And I looked at it all week, and it's true. So, anyway, they're just not connected. But I think it's processing in the semiconductors. I really do. If that means anything to anybody.
I have a question that I like to ask. In Korea, when she held on to the rock and she didn't want to go into the new land, was that a form of suicide, or did she have a mental breakdown?
She snapped.
Say it again?
She just snapped. It was a mental breakdown. It wasn't suicide. She just yeah.
No, I just want to bring emphasis on the white people are committing these murders along the way. Like the hunter shooting the woman, and then it was the white destroyer that ended up shooting Tawia, and then they were responsible for the people dying on the ship, the disease that happened to them. They ended up throwing them overboard. And even instructing the Askaris to kill. So, but you know what? The way the book is written, when these things occur, if you're not connected, or if you don't see it, if you don't keep bringing this forward, you may not emphasize the fact that it is white people all of the time responsible for all of this killing, all of this disease, all of this terrorism, everything that is happening. They are responsible for all of it.
Just my thoughts on Tawiah really quick. It reminded me in 12 Years a Slave, when we read the book, this was an important part that was left out of the movie. There was a different black person. He was going to be beaten. He hadn't done anything, which is pretty common. He hadn't done anything incorrect, but the white person just decided, you're nothing. You're my property, animal, whatever. So he's going to whip him, and the black person just says, I can't take it anymore. And he beats the white person up and eventually kills him. He grabs a hatchet and hacks him to death. He ends up being summarily executed for killing this white person. But if folks remember that portion of the book, I think he even, after he kills the white person, he just walks calmly to the white folks' house and, tells them what he did. And that's just it. And I think we kind of had the same discussion. Did he go crazy? And I think it's just... I think when you're in an environment, I think Mr. Fuller has said that racism is crazy. I've heard Dr. Welsing, she's been on the program and talked about practicing racism should be in the DSM-4, but it's not. Practicing racism, mistreating someone on the basis of color is crazy. When you're in an entire planet that is dominated by insanity, having a logical response can look crazy. I think Tawiah's response was logical to say, I'm done with this. I'm not going. I'm staying here. If you're going to kill me, whatever, but I'm not leaving. That, I think that is a logical response. I don't think that's crazy or having a breakdown or anything. I think that's just a logical response. I think everybody has a point where they just, this is my threshold. I just can't take it anymore, and I just refuse to go along with this anymore. And whatever that means, that's fine. I just think that's human nature when you're in an oppressive and insane condition as they were and as we are right now, 2014. With that connectedness piece, though, I think that's one of the key aspects of the book, and it must be one of his key conclusions or points of emphasis, as I said, because he has a whole book. I've been using the photo of the book cover when I promote this program, Fragments. He has a whole book. I have not read Fragments, but I assume from what I know of him and his writing that that's got to be the premise, that we are fragmented in terms of a people where we are not working together in a constructive manner, and even fragmented from ourselves. And I thought of that, number one, I thought of Dr. Kamban, where he talks about having different selves, where you have a political self, where you have an economic self, where you have your health self, just, on down the line, where he says that you might be healthy in terms of, okay, I don't eat at McDonald's and I don't consume alcohol. I take care of myself. I drink lots of water. I don't drink soda, and I don't do white flour and white sugar and all their other toxins and poisons. But economic self is not so good, where you waste a lot of money. You have a jumbo TV in every room of your house, and you buy the most expensive possible car that you can, where you are just, fueling our oppressors and their many campaigns against us, giving them as much money as you possibly can. And he talks about that all the time, and making sure that you have all of yourselves aligned properly to support Black liberation. I think about that when I think about connectedness, and I also think about connectedness in terms of understanding. I think even, dare I say, context. in being able to process information and things that happen. Like, I think it can be very, very difficult when you lose those connections in terms of understanding why things happen. I think when you were talking about getting information and not being able to put the pieces together and not being able to come to an accurate conclusion about things, when you have fragments, when you don't have the whole picture about what has happened, what's happened to you individually, what's happened to us on the whole, just missing lots of information. It's very difficult to make an accurate, it's very difficult to get an accurate gauge and to come to an accurate conclusion about what should be done when you are disconnected, when you don't have all the info and what have you together. And I think white people, they purposely work to kind of keep us in that state. Let's see. Yeah, it just reminded me a lot of Context, that whole section. I reckon, unless anybody has anything that they want to touch on before we get to the second audio segment, anything else y'all wanted to make sure we brought up?
I'd like to mention when there was a sharp dispute that broke out among the whites, those who had taken out the body refused to continue doing the slave drivers' other work. The dispute remained unresolved. The destroyers hurried out. And then I think the people, the slaves, started thinking, well, or who was it that was saying, not me? And then Sobo looked at it as an opportunity. He would volunteer to do it. And then he had a plan. That it was a turning point, because I believe that leaders are born, and the situation presents itself, then the person who is a born leader will step forward when the situation comes to that point that it needs a leader. But it just shows that the whites did not want to do something that was generally a task of non-white.
They don't want to carry anything ever.
Right on.
I noticed at the very end how it said the word her. And that's the first time in the book it always goes we, our, us, the group. But at the very end, right when you stop reading the sentence, it says, how then could we have escaped the stupidity of the unconnected viewpoint? Each forever petrified in a separate situation, each hardened in her cut off condition. He's never done that before. I mean, it made me race to the end of the book, and he didn't do it again. And I just couldn't find any reason to just go with the her for the only time in the book that I could see. The only thing I saw on the last page is the fact that I thought that maybe Ayi Kwei Armah looked maybe androgynous, but just any time it just went with a her instead of a we or us or our. Did you notice that? Am I just being too picky?
I noticed the her. It reminded me of, I'm not for certain if that's the only time in the book or not, but I did notice it this week. It reminded me of Dr. Ani's book initially, when she is through the narrative where she's talking about us, we, that sort of thing. She does that as well. She doesn't just do it one time, though, where she'll use her in the book. And I think it's, at least in my mind, the way I processed it was that I think the system of white supremacy, white people in general, that they are so anti-female, which Dr. Ani talks about a lot. It's so male-centered, that it's always he, his, he, that I think it's uncommon for it to be her in that sentence where you're just talking in a kind of general sense. It would generally be he, his, man, not her, woman, to be speaking in a general sense. And I think that's unusual. You don't see that very frequently in writing. And that's one of the things that stood out when I read Dr. Ani's book. I know some other people do it as well, but she's just the person I'm thinking of right now since we've been talking about her book being connected to this one. And that's what it reminded me of when in that sentence where he uses the her, it reminded me of her book. And I think even in this book, I think he has, it fits that same pattern where he has a lot of female characters that are empowered. They're not just hanging out as some sort of sexual object or what have you, but they are empowered. A lot of the female characters are the smartest ones, that they figured it out. Abena and some of the others, they are the smartest characters that have figured out what the problem is and are trying to work to get a solution to it. So I think that's kind of very counter to the typical Western white way of presenting females and presenting narratives that are very male focused. But that was just my way of processing it.
Okay.
Right on. I will assume folks are good. If you have other comments, folks that are listening in, if you did not put a hand up, you got to press *6 to get your hand up. If you didn't get a hand up and you had something that you wanted to share, just write it down. We will have time to share once the second audio segment concludes. If you didn't get to share, what have you, we should have a lot of time. We are still in chapter 5. Not sure when we will get out of it. We are still in chapter 5, the dance of love. We have a rather exciting segment coming up. Stay tuned. Listen closely. Should be great. We'll be looking forward to hearing commentary. I will get in again when listeners vote on a book and then people do not participate. That definitely burns my grits when you all, and it was not even close in voting for this book to be read, and then the participation wanes, whereas people aren't really participating. And I get all the time people say, well, we listen to the archives and it's great and it's so helpful. I could care less about that. That is not worth 2 cents. This is supposed to be a book study session. It is much better when there is participation and folks are chiming in with their observations and what you individually saw. The creator sends us all different signals, different messages. We all get different information from the reading, and the book study sessions are supposed to be kind of pooling and sharing, exchanging those ideas and thoughts about the work, which makes it much better. That said, we will go ahead and get started. Context of White Supremacy, Mr. Ayi Kwei Armah, 2000 Seasons, segment number 2. Sobo worked with the energy possible only to those possessed by some transcending love of their work itself. Working for the destroyers, he returned fatigued deep into every night. Yet even in his exhaustion, there was the feeling about him of a being eagerly searching after some profound secret. His speech had become reluctant. Thrice only, in great excitement on his return at night, he muttered in answer to a question from someone, was it Mokili? Only yesterday the land was still in sight. There has been little motion. I saw the land. How infinitely stupefying the prison of the single, unconnected viewpoint, station of the cut-off vision. How deathly the separation of faculties, the separation of people, the single agent's action is waste motion. The single agent's freedom, useless liberty. Such individual action can find no sense until there is again that higher connectedness that links each agent to the group. Then the single person is no cut-off thing, but an extension of the living group. the single will but a piece of the group's active will, each mind a part of a larger common mind. Then each eye inspires itself with visions springing from group need. The ear is open to sounds beneficial to the listening group. The limbs move and the hands act in unbroken connection with the group. That is how, in the end, we came to know what C.O.W.S saw, where he went and what he did there even before his single freedom burst into the fruit of greater liberation. For nights an unwanted pensiveness had held C.O.W.S in its grip. Every morning he went up above us, ready to show obedience to the destroyers. What they commanded him to do, he did, taking perfect pains to leave no cause for the destroyers' dissatisfaction with him. But his nights were sleepless. Once one of us asked him if he needed any help. The offer broke spontaneously into a chuckle of impotence, a chuckle unshared by C.O.W.S. He simply thanked the offerer and fell back into his silence. That last night he lay in this restless quiet of his a long time. Then he rose again. He was gone a pregnant time, and when he returned he lay down with no sound at all, as if he were a soul only, with no heavier substance left. All we could hear, those of us still awake that night, was his heavy breathing. Then we heard the heavy sound of happy disaster. Our bodies underneath their traps, in a pathetic sympathy of impotence, shook to the rhythms of the ship's jarring vibration, and none of us dared ask aloud the questions on our mind, for still our liberation was not yet. After the first thunderous sound itself, so unexpected, there came the longer, softer sound of water. Water swirling, water sucked into airspace before closed against it. More of the eerie thunder followed. As for the ship, it shook like an angered cripple. There was not just one sound, then not two, not even 7 separate sounds, but a long, multiple thunder, like an unending tear in the sky's own fabric, broken at short intervals, with the welcome, unbearable loudness of whole new barrels exploding, caught in the advancing, consuming fire. The rest we heard, connected later. One askari, faithful to the destroyers beyond wisdom, had rushed with a nightlight to the thunder's source. The white destroyers had been sleeping in their high security above. Now they, too, rushed in panic, ignorant as to what the cause of the heavy noise could be. The chief destroyer reached the powder store first among the whites. He arrived in time to see the faithful askari there with his burning torch, his consternation causing the whole of his face to shake convulsively. The chief destroyer was looking for the cause of this calamity. He saw the black body there with a burning torch among the powder kegs. He acted first and left confusing thought to tomorrow. With his small gun, he blasted the slave spirit free of its body. There was nothing much else the chief destroyer or any other destroyer could do. Before him the kegs of potent powder blew up one after the other, those closest to the wood of the ship's outer wall exploding first, leaving open holes through which the seawater rushed and began to wet all the burning powder. The destroyers made desperate attempts to save their powder. Their chief pressed them all into that urgent service, but against the rising water their numbers were far from enough. It was not only powder the white destroyers stood to lose, it was soon clear everything was threatened by the water inexorably rising. The chief destroyer decided to take a fatal step, a happy step. He would have us freed from our traps, first to help in the work of salvage, and secondly, keen is the greed of whites to ensure that we ourselves, his goods, would not be lost to the raging waters. Freed, we were led up into the air above, then into the blasted powder store. Weak from confinement, our bodies grown alien, we struggled to haul kegs of powder already wet higher than the invading seawater could reach as yet. Among us, as we worked, the experts in the arts of speech kept each warning from C.O.W.S close to our mind, chanting it like a work song to the rhythm of our labor. Nothing yet, my sisters. Nothing yet, my brothers. The time is not yet ripe. The time will soon be ripe. Before dawn, an undecided breeze started. As it gathered strength, it brought a welcome coolness, for this was hot work. The breeze blew stronger as the sun began to rise. The ship began moving forward slowly, away from the rising and a little to the left, but returning from another of his anxious visits down below, the chief destroyer, in great agitation of body and spirit, both shouted to the large destroyers and sent them hurrying at great speed up the tall poles holding up the sails. The ship slowed, turned reluctantly, then picked up speed on a crazy, jagged course backward into the rising sun and quite sharply to the left. The chief destroyer strode from one end to the other of the laboring ship, furious with anxiety, shouting ceaseless exhortations to the other white destroyers and to their askaris. What was the meaning of his shouts? How? Greater than any quality they have is the white destroyer's greed. The chief destroyer, his fear was about the sinking of his ship, the loss of what he chose to call his goods, our captive selves, and so of his soul worship, profit. This was the meaning those who understood him chanted for our understanding. The chief destroyer had decided to seek shallow water for his ship, a harsh avoidance of sure sinking. The chief destroyer's plan? To load his goods, ourselves, into the boats his ship carried and to bring us shoreward, where he hoped help from some other destroyer's ship would soon cross his path. The sea lay open, a revelation of beauty that morning. To the rising morning's first lights touched it, glancing off its 30,000 calm hollows before reaching the hastening eye. The ship, dragging water, moved slowly like an ancient, bulky beast, and the chief destroyer, wore despair on his angry face. We could not stop to look, but laboring under barrels of dripping powder, we saw from above the shape of land over water, blue at that distance. The ship moved on. The blue land turned green. The green grew flecks of brown in places till the ship at length shuddered to a stop on underlying sand. Distance still there was from the ship to land, but this was no distance to frighten any used to the sea. The destroyers, aided by their askaris, made the large boats ready, sent them hurriedly dropping down upon the water. Among us, the experts in the arts of speech moved with their unending chant, "Ready, my sisters, ready, my brothers. The time is not ripe. The time will soon be here." Monstrous is the greed of the white destroyers, infinite their avarice. The chief destroyer, it was his intention to do all in his power to save us from death in the water, to save us for use as animals, to save us for his destroying people's future profit. The boats were lowered, the askaris standing firm against our eagerness to reach the boats, counted 30 to go down into each, with 2 destroyers holding guns watching in each boat. The future the destroyers planned for us was plainly visible. Into the bottom of each boat the destroyers had ordered us first to throw the heavy traps and chains that held us down all these many days. Let us, rose the chant. Let the experts in the arts of speech spread ourselves among the people. That way we shall have better understanding in each boat. We shall need to work close together. The chant was repeated, a happy work song, helping to lighten the destroyers' anxious suspicion, helping to prepare the way. The boats were not enough for all of us at once. How many? 5 is the number of our remembrance. 5 boats on the sea. 30 human beings unarmed going in each boat, a white destroyer armed at each end. There was a 3rd destroyer in the boat that took the lead. He also had a gun, a little one. In addition, he carried in his left a ring loaded with keys to the traps and chains waiting beneath our feet in the bottoms of the boats. In the iron sound of these keys, we heard all there was need here of the white destroyers' future intentions against us, of their number and that of their askaris, half, a little more. We were left behind on the ship to keep watch against the rest of us, the larger part. Standing straight at the forward end of the leading boat, Sobo broke into song. He sang a song whose light sound was a perfect wrapping for the heavy meaning of the words. He sang with an expression of utter happiness, so that the white destroyer, sitting beneath him, fondling his gun and looking up from time to see his face, saw only the face of one so well enslaved he was happy to help his master salvage his wealth even from the teeth of such opportune disaster. Happy was the white destroyer, secure his trust in the faithful slave behind him, singing in the wind. C.O.W.S. words counted the 6 nearest that happy destroyer and asked if they could summon all their strength. A hum answered him, yes. C.O.W.S. words told the 6 it was important to do one thing before any other, to seize the keys from the destroyer who had them, or, failing that, to send them to the bottom of the sea. The boats moved heavily. They could not have been meant ordinarily to take so many people at a time, and the askaris rowing did not have the air of fundis at this work. Half the distance between the grounded ship and land, the ripples on the sea began to rise and take the form of real waves. A chalet, who loved the sea and knew it with a lover's intimacy, was among those in the leading boat. He looked intently at the water and said, with no betraying hint of excitement in his voice, "From just over there, the sea's depth is not dangerous." Okai told those close to him in his language, and Kisa in her language also repeated the message. None raised their voices. They might as well have been muttering foolish, inconsequential words to themselves, for all any hostile listener could understand. C.O.W.S. waited till the words had traveled round and been understood. Then he asked finally, "Who among us cannot swim to save himself?" There was only one, a boy, who answered. Where he came from, water was not a thing to play with, and not many ever learned to swim. Who is strong enough to stay with him and lend him strength? C.O.W.S. sang the question. A woman and a man offered their strength. So softly, like a man entranced in some private world, not concerned to touch any other being with his words, C.O.W.S. called out to his companions in the boat and asked each one if they felt they had strength enough for a struggle in which defeat would be death. All said they were ready. C.O.W.S. in his song called the 6 nearest the white destroyer carrying the keys, called them again by their names, and reminded them they should think of nothing save the capture of the keys from that destroyer. C.O.W.S. called 3 more. Their aim should be the destruction of the 2nd white destroyer with his gun. Another 3 were to take the 3rd destroyer. The rest, according to their nearness, took it upon themselves to incapacitate the askaris rowing. But now the white destroyer, with the keys, shifted uneasily and looked hard at his soft-spoken victims. He nudged his gun with his elbow in the manner of one wanting to assure himself it was securely placed, and then he looked out anxiously at the slow shoreline. "Now," C.O.W.S. sang, in the same gentle tone he had used from the beginning. Simultaneously, he jumped up and twisted his body in the backward leap, aiming to reach the white destroyer with the keys behind him. But one foot caught a woman's shoulder, and C.O.W.S.' impetus was lost a hand's frustrated reach from the destroyer with the keys. A look not just of terror, but also of the sudden belated comprehension of those betrayed by the ones closest to them came upon the white destroyer's face. The destroyer fired at C.O.W.S. fallen body. He could not miss. Flesh was blasted off C.O.W.S. right thigh, and the skin on his back was scorched in a jagged line along half its length on the right. But C.O.W.S., he seemed to have no feeling left in his body, no fear of pain holding back his mind. He hurled his body forward with even greater force than he had used in his interrupted leap, and this time hit the white destroyer with all that unbroken force and drove his head crashing against the raised edge of the boat. The 6 others reached the white destroyer with the keys that same instant. One tried to wrench the gun first from his fallen body, but the destroyer had a dying maniac's grip on his weapon, and the first one pulled at it in vain. As for C.O.W.S., he did not even seem to see the weapon. He did not seem to see anything, to tell the truth, save the keys now between his body and the white destroyer's. Grasping all the keys firmly with both hands, he forced them together with their leather rope off the destroyer's struggling form and wound the leather securely round his own bleeding body. The 6 others battered the white body under them. One more turned to help the first one trying to take possession of the gun. Together they pried the weapon out of the destroyer's reluctant hands before the broken body was hurled head first into the water. The second white destroyer on that boat, he had no time to take accurate aim with his weapon. He shot his gun, but not before 3 of us closer to him than C.O.W.S. had been to the first white destroyer smashed bodily into him and fouled his aim so that his shot flew past all the heads within the boat and wasted itself in the air. That white body was sent to join its companion in the water. There the 3 followed it and held it down till it had taken in its last lungful of salt water. In the next boat, the white destroyers, their apprehension risen to panic at sight of the confusion in the leading boat, fired their guns forward into that boat. Ignorant destroyers, they thought to help the other destroyers and were amazed when their own victims flew at them. They fought using their guns, now impotent, as clubs, and their fighting was desperate, but it was also brief. They too found in the seawater beneath us a final resting place for their murderous spirits. The 3 boats following the first 2, they were overturned, those of us in them rushing at once to one side, uniting all their weight and thus sending the Askaris and the white destroyers and their guns, everything together, into the water. What could wet guns do for the white destroyers now? They too joined their companion destroyers. Up on the ship itself, the fighting took longer, and it was far more bloody than on the boats. The white destroyers left behind, as they saw and understood what was happening in the boats, drew together with their Askaris and put a deadly distance between themselves and their intended victims. As a warning first, they shot 2 of us, a man and a girl just reaching womanhood. Then they stood watching to see which of us would try to move against them. One man among us, tall, possessor of a powerful body, shouted to us to rush forward with him, but he himself was brought down before he had taken 3 steps. He was right, said a voice hidden among us, but we must go against them all together. We shall need one to give the sound. You give it. This was not a lone voice. The man waited the space of 3 breaths and gave the sound. At that sound, it seemed as if all the white destroyers and all their askaris shot every gun they had into us. We halted and shrank back. 8 of us lay in the space still between us and the white destroyers and their askaris. Among us the fear of death rose and shook the courage of our recent preparation out of most. While we hesitated, 10 more bodies fell, and those farthest forward hurled their weight backward against the rest of us. Then the voice that had given the first sound gave another. It was a voice filled with courage, a voice to exorcise all ordinary fear, but the fear among us on that ship was no ordinary fear. For in the face of armed enmity is unarmed courage not merely another hazy name for suicide. That voice called more strongly. The circumstances countered its call. But then, in the moment itself, when deadly circumstance and the living urge of that lone voice held each other in such lame struggle, a change came which none of us had allowed ourselves to look forward to. There were 8 white destroyers left on the ship. The askaris left behind were 6. All, the 6 together with the 8, stood apart from us, their victims, near one pointed end of the ship. The space from the middle to the end opposite the white destroyers and their askaris was our space. The distance between the 2 groups was death to any trying to cross it. We had thought that all the guns, the white destroyers, as well as their askaris, had now been fired against us. The voice urging us forward a second time shouted the whites and their askaris would need time to fill their guns with death again, and in that time we could be upon them. Before the full revival of our shattered courage, 2 guns blasted the shaky calm. Those in the lead turned to each other, wondering who had this time been hit, and they were amazed to see no new casualties among ourselves. We had seen nothing yet. Before us the vision was incredible. 2 of the white destroyers lay unmoving on the ship's wood, destroyed by fire from their own askaris' guns. It was impossible immediately to tell how many of the zombies had revolted, turned miraculously human, and thrown death rebounding against the destroyers they were bound to protect from their victims. What we saw clearly now was the division of the camp of death. A gun whirled like a monstrous long club in the air, descended faster than it had gone up. A third destroyer lay bleeding on the wood under stampeding feet. But the striker of the last good blow had struck his last. 3 separate guns crashed into him, 2 colliding with his head between them, 1 sweeping his legs from under him, so that his body was hurled violently forward to meet us in our second rush. The twin blows had pushed that Ascari's eyeballs out from within his head. His body lay prone under us, the tongue hanging out a hand's length from its mouth, the eyeballs fallen so far they almost touched the hanging tongue. Blood from the nose fell in a slow trickle down between the eyes on to the tongue. All we had were our hands, but now they were sufficient. We caught one white destroyer, almost ready with his gun filled with new death. He was not aiming it at us. His intended victim was a second Ascari. A crowd of us reached that white destroyer an instant before he could fire. Even in the agony of death, that destroyer seemed concerned only to claw his way to the remaining Ascari, whose happy infidelity had brought us life in the surroundings of death itself. The destroyer fought against 30 as if we, the 30, were non-existent in ourselves, as if the 30 were a mere obstacle in his path to the one Ascari. As for the other Ascaris, like the zombies they still were, they fought us, corpses possessed by the white urge to kill humans who had never harmed them. Before they died, they destroyed one more among us, maimed 2, and wounded another 5, but these last wounds were slight. Of the Ascari's death, nothing is left that needs saying here. They died foolishly, like zombies defending evil against our own people. But now there were 5 white destroyers left. There was not one of us, victims on that ship, who with our own hands did not strain to reach those 5 to take our vengeance for so much suffering in their greed. There was no need for weapons. 30 victim eyes searched for each destroyer and found him. 7 hands caught each ashen limb. 1 white destroyer was thrown into the water with not one of his limbs. These followed after. Another had his left thigh stretched away from the right till the bones between them cracked. He was hurled off the ship in the wake of the first. The third was strangled by so many pulling hands his neck turned longer than a chicken's, ungraceful in its slender death. The 4th and the last white destroyers, they went down together, bound tight with rope from the flapping sailcloth overhead. Women leaped headlong from the ship. Men leaped into the seawater from the side away from the destroyers' corpses in the joy of liberation, and swam till they reached the others around the overturned boats. We pushed the boats till we came to the shore. There we righted them and rested to gather strength. Then those who knew about rowing went back to bring more survivors. 3 times the boats went and came with people, The fourth time they brought food taken from the belly of the ship. The fifth trip was for barrels of wet powder and guns, 30 of them that had remained unsunk and undestroyed in the fighting. It was also now that children climbed up the ship's posts and cut down the heavy cloth. This was wise. That first night on the shore it rained. There was no first gentle drizzle to warn us. The rain came, sudden and abundant, did not last long, and stopped with just as little preparation as it had begun. We had had no time to build sufficient shelter. Had it not been for the heavy cloth brought from the ship, we would have suffered greatly that first night. We were weak from the spending of our strength this past day, as also from the sheer unexpectedness itself of all these fortunate events. Following the rain, the night was a cold, silent night. The sea itself lost the heavy sound of its daylight surf and lay like a huge creature struck dumb by sudden misfortune. We lay under canopies of cloth stretched over high poles on dry sloping earth, with ditches cut across the sides and top of our space to lead all that water off. The rushing water woke the first to sleep, but all again slept calmly once the rain was gone, all save those who had elected to be guards. The morning was filled with beauty. The day before itself had been unbelievable, and the business choking it had left its truth unsavored. This morning we woke and were able to stretch limbs too long accustomed only to the miser motions imposed on us within slave traps. We were able to take in air that brought a welcome, unused fragrance into nostrils, mouths and throats too long abused with filth. We were able to raise our own eyes and see around us the world entire, earth, sea, and sky broad, limitless before us. Some simply lay there on the grass and wept with thinking of the days and nights, the weeks that had gone before. The first fire there we made with one of the white destroyer's guns. The Askari Juma, that was his name, he who had turned against the destroyers, his masters, destroyed them and survived them. He chose the driest powder from one barrel's center, prepared the gun, and fired it close against dried leaves and faggots. This day also we rowed to the ship again to bring all things we could use for cooking, all knives and implements we might find further uses for. Context of White Supremacy. If you are interested in participating, feel free. The number to dial, 760-569-7676. The code, 564-943#. Press star 6 if you would like to participate. The number to dial again is 760-569-7676. The code, 564-943#. Make sure I'm not giving out inaccurate information. That is it, 943-POUND, 564-943-POUND, again, the code. We have a little less than a half hour. Should be ample time if folks have things they would like to share. We have Karma, Mr. Demery 4, you all are with us. If there are other folks who would like to participate, press *6. Any thoughts on the second audio segment from this week?
Well, I noticed that the things from the 70s haven't changed much at all. Beginning when they say that he found these guys in the gunpowder room, and he saw him standing there. He acted first and left confusing thoughts to tomorrow, and with his small gun, he blasted the slave spirit free of its body. And they just do the same thing now. If they see a black person standing there and they're a little bit confused, they just shoot him first and they just work that out later. So that hasn't changed much at all.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Okay. It looks as though the enslaved people had had enough, and they were mounting up a rebellion, and they had this connectedness that it seems as though they had a strategy and a code to where SOBO would give these signals, and then they would react. And he was brave. He took, some fire, but he stayed true to what he was, what his mission was. And it looks like it was 3 boats. And so I guess the insurrection or the mutiny started on one boat, and then it's like a chain reaction. It started happening on the other boats along with it. When I found this one passage where it says, "For in the face of armed enmity is unarmed courage not merely another hazy name for a suicide." But your situation can be of such that you may even be unarmed, but you're left no choice. I mean, they were faced with disease. They were dying from mere exposure, and there was no guarantee that it was anything, and no light at the end of the tunnel. So you just have to go for it. And so they started the mutiny, and it looked as if it was going pretty good. And even at least one of the Ascars, saw that, hey, I'm not loyal to the white destroyers anymore. I'm going to turn on the side of my people. So it was, as the book said, it was amazing that happened, but he started killing the white destroyers also. And I guess we'll have to wait to find out, what eventually happens. But to me, it says before us, the vision was incredible. 2 of the white destroyers lay unmoving on the ships were destroyed by the fire from their own Ascaris guns. So the Ascaris, for one time in the book, was showing some sense of humanity and did the correct thing. I mean, well.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting about the Ascaris being able to do something non-zombie-like, because I just always thought you would have to channel a tremendous amount of resources at them to save them in any way, shape, or form. I just couldn't see how people with such limited resources could ever save any of the Ascaris.
I thought that was pretty profound. I'm sorry, did you have more, Karma? Sorry about that.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I thought that was pretty significant as well. The Ascaris who turned on the white destroyers and started killing them once the revolt kicked off. Because at that point, it didn't seem like it was a foregone conclusion that the black people were going to win. Like, it seemed like there was some ambivalence. Some of them they weren't as courageous once they started seeing some of the black people get shot and killed. It didn't seem like, the white people could have maybe, if they could have just reloaded and kept firing, that they maybe could have suppressed the rebellion if they had just killed a few more black people. I thought that was important because I feel like it's, at least at this point in the book, and I mean, we're closing on the finish line. We are significantly beyond the halfway point of the book. I feel like the presentation of the Ascaris and King Koranche and a lot of the black people, really all of the black people who have been participating, cooperating, whatever, working with the white people, it has been as though these folks are just a lost cause. Nothing you can do. Slave driver John, these folks are corrupted, they're contaminated, they've gone down the path of the destroyers, and nothing can be done about them. And then, bang, they flip and they're doing the correct thing. They're working against the white people. I thought that was a very important passage, and it reminded me, because we were talking about this yesterday, people can change. Talking about black people, I said it yesterday, and I will reiterate here. I do not think white people are going to change their conduct. That is one thing I have already come to a conclusion about. However, victims, I do think people have the capacity to change. Minister Malcolm X, many people recognized his birthday earlier this week. He was not exactly going out and doing the constructive thing and helping out black people earlier in his life. He might have been a zombie himself in the way that he was behaving earlier in life, and I think that's the way that he referenced his conduct before he became a devout Muslim and more informed about racism, white supremacy. So I just think that's very important to kind of keep that in mind, that even though we black people might be disconnected, fragmented, behaving in support of racists, working against black liberation and our own self-interest, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's always going to be the case. And I think that's super important, and I'm glad that that popped up right here in a very dramatic, significant portion of the book. And for me, it's related. It's not even diverging from what we were talking about. C.O.W.S. behavior, him being this kind of doting, happy, enslaved black person, and he too ends up, bam, sticking it to it. And it seems like that was his goal the whole time. I think the book has kind of been talking about that connectedness and him just doing all this to trick the white people. But I think that was pretty important as well. If nothing else, to perhaps reserve judgment and not be so quick to leap on a black person who looks like they are a willing pawn, if you will. Those are some of the terms that I hear used, that this is just a no good Uncle Tom for white people to maybe pause before jumping on that black person. Any other thoughts about that? The Askaris who turned on the white people ultimately, and or C.O.W.S conduct leading up to this revolt?
I still remember that this is fiction, and even though we say that, I still think it would take some resources to help make those people well again, because remember, white people have lied about everything, and that little lie about, everything that does not kill you only serves to make you stronger, that's one of the biggest lies of all. That's like saying, every car accident that doesn't completely total your car only leaves it stronger. The earthquake that does not collapse your house only leaves it stronger. No, the things that do not completely destroy your mind and body do not leave it stronger. They leave it damaged. So, I just, those people who have been abused by white people, they are damaged, and they still will need help. I don't think it's like, the abuser's gone and I'm suddenly well. I don't think it works like that. But I do think that they can be better.
I felt that the old adage of Uncle Tom, I investigated that character, from a different standpoint. And if you look at it differently, there had to be some people that would pretend to go along with the status quo in order for the survival to take place. Whether Uncle Tom really thought that way or whether he was actually just acting in order to be able to assist the survival of many, many other blacks that would come along. It brings to mind the role that Lou Gossett Jr. had in Roots when he was helping Kunta Kinte to adapt to the new situation. If Kunta Kinte had kept on with the way that his behavior was, he never would have survived, and there never would have been a generation on afterwards to where Alex Haley came into being. So, although Lou Gossett Jr.'s role was one of sort of an Uncle Tom, there has to be someone like that in order for the survival of, or a remnant to continue on. And so that was my take on it. I had to look at it kind of inside out to not just look at it one way, as Uncle Tom was this villain, or that people like Lou Gossett Jr.'s character was so much different than Kunta Kinte, although Kunta Kinte was the hero. But then again, without Lou Gossett Jr., he never would have survived. He did lose a foot, but at least he survived.
The caller at 3262, did you have something you wanted to share, contribute?
Greetings, yes. One of the passages that caught my attention was where C.O.W.S had returned back to the bottom of the ship, and one of the other victims asked if there was anything that they could do to help. And some people chuckled, but C.O.W.S didn't. And I thought that was pretty significant that this person, it seems as if they kind of drew courage from C.O.W.S actions, and they wanted, even though they were helpless, or it seemed as if they were helpless, they still offered their services, and C.O.W.S was appreciative and thanked the offerer. That was it.
I thought that was interesting too. I don't know if I was, I don't know if I had the same thought process as the people who laughed and thinking, I don't know what they're going to be able to do to help. But yeah, I mean, at least to make the offer, that is significant. That is saying something. That compassion and that sense of connectedness, and them drawing some strength or encouragement from C.O.W.S and his act that ultimately led to them being able to get liberated from the slave ship. I think everybody, I guess, to the point about the Askaris being damaged, that's one thing I guess I would get in as well. I think everybody has been damaged. It's not just the black people that we think of as oh, well, they're cooperating with the racists or they're working with the racists. I mean, everybody is cooperating with the racists, whether you're C.O.W.S or whether you're just one of the numerous black people that's chained below. You are cooperating. You are supporting the system of slavery, the system of white supremacy, just by being a slave, just by being alive as a non-white person. You're supporting their system, and you are damaged as a result of that. So I don't think it's, I really try to get away from evaluating who is more damaged. I'm more damaged. This person is more damaged, because I think it can be difficult to quantify that. But I think everybody, and I think that comes through in the book where they talk about once they even get off the boat, that everybody is damaged from being on the ship and just having gone through all of this, that everybody has been scarred. Not just the folks who were the Askaris or the folks who were directly working with the racist white destroyers. Let's see. What else that stood out? The music, that kind of stood out as being significant for me in the book as well. Them being codified, if you will, through the use of song. And that stood out. The audio that we started off with at the beginning, where I was saying where they were talking about no drums, because we know you all can try to coordinate and get slick on us and do some nonverbal communication to try to get out of here. That popped up, them singing and communicating with each other, unbeknownst to the white destroyers. I thought that was pretty significant as well. And I've had these conversations, they've come up on the program, the importance of music and how that can be used in our efforts to solve this problem. And consequently, how white people have been using sounds, music, to keep us enslaved. I thought that was pretty important passage as well. We have about 5 minutes or so left. Did anybody have any thoughts on that or anything else stood out as significant in the portion we heard this week?
What was he doing that he was so tired every night?
I'm not really sure that they went into detail about, all the specifics of what exactly he was having to do. I guess was John, the slave driver, who had his job prior to. I don't know all of everything else he was having to do other than taking off the dead bodies, and it seemed like they were killing people and/or people were just dying from the heinous conditions pretty regularly. So that would be one gruesome aspect, but I don't know what else he was being required to do that was so exhausting.
I thought it was something with booby traps or something.
Yeah, it doesn't, at that point where he came back and they're talking about him being so tired, it doesn't really give any detail about what they were commanding him to do. It just says he did it and tried to do so to not give them any reason to be suspicious of him. I think later on when it gets closer to the time for the rebellion, where he's going down to see if he can set the get these explosions, get the explosions to start off with the gunpowder and all that, and give us a bit more detail about that. But I don't know that maybe he was doing that every day. I didn't get that impression. I got the impression that he was having to do a lot of stuff directly for white people in the operation of the ship that was so exhausting every day. And some of that might too just be that mental energy of having to perform in that manner, as though you are this dutiful enslaved black person for these white people. That might be mentally taxing as well. Because I think anyone who has been in that position where you have to smile and bear it for racists on a daily basis, that definitely takes a mental toll on you.
Another passage that I thought was significant, to me at least, was with the paragraph that stated, "The single agent's action is waste motion. The single agent's freedom is useless energy. Such individual action can find no sense until there is again that higher connectedness that links each agent to the group. Then the single person is no cut-off thing but an extension of the living group." I thought that was significant because, I thought about myself, I've been thinking about that a lot lately, and, just sometimes getting upset with victims because they don't see the sense of urgency, but that higher connectedness that links each agent to the group, I'm thinking it might not always come through people. It comes through the Creator and our ancestors. So just trying to not be so, not be focused on victims and not on my single actions either, and understanding that there is no I, just a we. But how can I say this? Trying to unite the we through the higher connectedness, not through people necessarily. Am I making sense?
Think I got it. If other folks, if they have questions, feel free to chime in last minute or two if you have a question, or if you need greater clarity getting explained.
Well, I think that connectedness is, I don't think that it's unidirectional. I think it's bidirectional. It's not even through one entity, through a higher entity. I think it goes out in every direction. Higher, lower, person, place, universal. I think it's how things spread themselves out in the universe. I mean, some people think it's just through a higher power, though.
I definitely have to ponder on it, but I like that, being able to connect through a lot of different things. The Creator reaching out in a myriad of different ways to connect people. That's even as I'm pondering on it, I'll think on it a little more, but I think that can definitely work. I feel like I've seen that in action in terms of how people connect different, just all of the different things that are in the universe, whether it's through plants or food or music or ideas or whatever, concepts. I think you can make those connections in a variety of different ways. And once that connection gets established, it can be built upon, whether the connection initially starts off through growing tomatoes, that can evolve to, us having a connection about what we need to be doing to work against racism. So definitely those connections can happen all over the place, particularly if the Creator is supposed to be expressed through everything. With that, we have done our 3 hours. We are still in chapter 5. Oh, I was going to get that in too. The chapter this the title of this chapter, The Dance of Love. Way back when we started this chapter, when they did the ceremony where they were dancing, they had the ritual. King Koranche, he wanted his son to be with Abena. She was not feeling him, and that's how the group that just participated in this revolt, that's where they tried to escape in the first place, was with this big dance and ceremony. And I was thinking, because that's the title of the chapter, The Dance of Love, I was thinking that, oh, that's the symbolism. But as the chapter, I mean, this is all still chapter 5. As it's gone on, I was thinking, well, oh, maybe this is the significance of the title of the chapter. Since they were singing, that's what started the revolt. Maybe the rebellion on the ship is the dance of love. Because I was even thinking, I think Dr. Kanban and many others have said the highest form of love would be expressed through liberation, particularly for black people. I mean, that would have to be the highest expression of love, is to do everything that I can to get you out of this terrible predicament we are in because of the white destroyers. So I was thinking that the title of the chapter had a different relevance for me after this week's segment, since there was the use of music. That's kind of how they were able to codify and coordinate their rebellion on the ship. But yeah, wanted to make sure I got that in before we wrapped up too. Anywho, we will be back next week, still in chapter 5, but we are almost done. We probably will have 3 sessions left, pending on how much material we get through over the next 2 weeks, but it's looking like it'll probably be 3, and we will be all done. Moving on to the next book. Hope the participation picks up. Know the weather is getting nice, and it is holiday weekend. Can't forget about that. But hopefully folks will participate, as this was the book that you all wanted to do. We will be wrapping up. Hopefully folks can share their thoughts if they think it's been constructive, or things that have stood out, takeaway points that they will keep with them and marinate on once we wrap this book up in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Anywho, we'll be back tomorrow. Compensatory call-in, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. Tune in. News, observations, workplace racism, past 7 days. Looking forward to the exchange of views. If you need Mr. Fuller's works, producejustice.com. You can visit the website, get the word guide, and or the code book, producejustice.com. You can also check out Kamisha M. Africa, Understanding Isness, right here, Black Talk Radio Network. Great information related to liberation of black people from white terror domination, white supremacy. Thanks all for tuning in. Be safe. I know this is a so-called holiday, horror day weekend. Be safe if you're going to be going out, participating. I know the sun is out, weather is nice. If you got a drink, I've said it before, I will say it again. You see alcohol played a nasty bit in the demise of the black people on this ship in the book here. If you got a drink, I encourage, get to one spot and stay there. Coordinate that in advance. You can be at somebody's house or wherever. Get to that one spot and remain there. Really feel like you're asking for trouble once you have consumed alcohol or any other intoxicants, and you got to get behind that wheel, particularly at night and especially on holiday weekends. You know, enforcement officers all across the so-called country, they especially ramp up their forces and are on the lookout to try to give out tickets and lock people up for driving under the influence, or if you don't have all of your paperwork that white people say you need. They are especially hungry on these particular weekends. So keep that in mind. I'm not even telling you not to go out and, do your thing if you got to do all that for so-called Memorial Day weekend. But just, keep in mind, this is a time where I suspect a whole lot of black people who are trying to go out and have fun, have a good time, end up having massive problems, having court costs, court fees if they are not placed in greater confinement because they were having fun and went out and got behind the wheel and bad things happened. Our PSA before we conclude. Creator, we ask that you help non-white people remain safe and codified, especially over the next 72 hours Really, this should be any time under the system of white supremacy, but particularly over the next 72 hours. Remind us that we have nothing to celebrate while white terrorism continues to dominate and ruin black people, non-white people's lives worldwide. Help us remain dedicated to becoming the best people we can possibly be, universal woman, universal man. Help us remember, regardless of what white people say we should be doing, we have an assignment to replace the system of white supremacy with a system of justice. Help us remain patient with other black people, victims of racism. Help us remain patient with ourselves. It has been time. Replace racism with justice as soon as possible. Context of White Supremacy signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
I'm a victim, brother.
Problem. You're a victim.
I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning.
Shut up.
The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.